All right, folks, welcome to Social Justice Politicast. This is the week of March 9th, and I am Gabriel, and I'm here with.
Keon Bliss.
Thank you so much, Keyan, for jumping on with us this week. I'm really excited to have you here to talk about what we have flagged for this upcoming city council session that's happening tomorrow, which will be Tuesday the 9th. But before we get into that, I just wanted to do a quick review of some of the items that we had flagged from last week's city council. We had flagged actually both the city council and the county board of supervisors had received the same presentation from the Sacramento Housing and Redevelopment Agency last week, which oversees our public and affordable housing complexes and our programs in Sacramento. Essentially, they got an external audit that was commissioned by the Board of Supervisors for the sum of $650,000. And the reason why they had an external audit was because the agency itself has not presented an internal audit to either the city or the county since 2019. So they had gone 7 years without presenting the results of their own internal audit. So an external audit was requested, and in that audit, they were had flagged some significant concerns, especially around their housing choice vouchers, which is also commonly known as Section 8 in the city, which receives millions of federal dollars to help people pay a portion of their rent. Essentially, the audit had found that there was a significant timely delay in processing files under that program. Files could be interpreted as applications, as just in terms of getting people into the program itself, actually getting them into housing, fulfilling the requirement that their the portion of their rent is covered by the program. There has been a lot of issues around SHRA and how both the city and the county oversee this department, and kind of have in the past kicked the can back and forth in terms of whose responsibility is to hold them accountable. There was, if folks remember, late last year, there was a joint session from the city and the county that we had flagged, that they were going to be having a joint meeting to kind of overview SHRA and how they could better respond to the homeless crisis or unhoused crisis in Sacramento. Not a lot came out of that except a whole bunch of like back pats and like, we're doing a great job by coming together and talking about this. But it was suffice it to say, it was a situation in which we're going to be hearing a lot more out of this audit in the next few months, because of the issues that were identified, and obviously the issue of lack of affordable housing in Sacramento continuing to rise and continuing to be an issue. Something I did want to draw attention to, just because it's timely and relevant, that there is an article from the SAC-B that we will link in the show notes about a certain city council member, Lisa Kaplan in District 1, who had identified an area for an affordable housing complex in her district and then secretly emailed her constituents that they should sue the city to stop it from happening. It was it was reported on by one Robin Epley of the Sacramento Bee, and we will link that article in the show notes, because I do think that it was a really interesting read in terms of how often the city council become their own obstacles in the solutions that they propose. So something to keep an eye out for. But we also had at the city council on Tuesday of last week at 2 p.m. was kind of the beginning of these budgetary workshops. And I would strongly recommend that folks go back and listen to last week's episode with Katie Valenzuela, former city council member for District 4, because she did an incredible job kind of setting the table for what these conversations are for, like their purpose, as well as what we can hope as the public to get out of them. And she did, and I think that she put it so well that made it very clear that these are not meant to be easy to understand. Right? These conversations around the city budget and our $66 million deficit is not meant for the public to be like, well, why are we why are we missing this money? And this upcoming week, we're going to be having the first round of these presentations from department heads. And this is why I'm really excited to have Keyan on, because in this first round, two particular agencies, the Department of Community Response, which is responsible for they are the response service provider for homelessness in Sacramento, and they are consistently underfunded. And then right along with them, we're going to be having the presentation from the Sacramento Police Department. And Keyan, could you give us kind of just like in terms of your background, because you actually sat on one of our commissions for 4 years, right? It was 4 years. Yeah. So if yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, 21 to 24.
Yeah. Yeah, so you were on the Sacramento Community Police Review Commission. Could you just give us like a quick background of what that commission is meant to do?
Yeah, so the Community Police Review Commission has is the city's portrayed civilian oversight body alongside the Office of Public Safety Accountability. It was established to provide community participation in reviewing and recommending police department policies, procedures, and best practices, including those related to community relations, hiring, and training best practices. We're also tasked with monitoring the implementation of recommendations that we make to city council, which we're required to do in bias based, regarding the city's policing policies and practices. And we also evaluate those, like how they're implemented, and as along with the sustainability of city policing initiatives and programs. That's how we're that's how we're framed to do it. That's what city code does. But unfortunately, how it's actually come out in practice is anything but. We have very little power. Or like we have, the commission has very little power when it comes to actually requiring the police department to do anything, especially changing its policies. And the commission's work has largely been ignored since its most recent iteration, established back in 2016. We have every year from 2018 to 2024, we have issued over 180 recommendations that have gone before the city council, but only one of them have actually received a direct vote by council, and that was on the update of the of SACPD's use of force policy back in June 2021.
Wow. Wow, that's wild. Like one recommendation. Wow. Yeah, well thank you so much for that background information. And the reason why I think it's so important for folks to understand what's going to be coming up in this meeting with the Sacramento Police Department giving their presentation for this budget workshop is because we do have a relatively new city manager, Markeisha Smith. And she said publicly, I believe it was last week, it was reported on by the Bee, that the police department is not immune to having their budget touched this time. And having said that prior to their presentation, I can imagine that the police department is going to kind of come to this presentation on the defensive, right? They know that they're having someone who might challenge their use of city funds as the largest recipient of city funds out of the budget. So having kind of had a front row seat to these budgetary presentations in the past, kind of give us a rundown of how you think this is going to go and how they've been able to maneuver getting so much money from the city in the past and how they've been able to frame that narrative to get really the lion's share of the pie.
Well, I mean, I think one of the biggest things that a lot of people don't know about when it comes to budgeting time, which departments get budgets, certain departments, like the police department, has an outside influence both like in the chamber and outside of it, namely through the Sacramento Police Officers Association, which is responsible for giving hundreds of thousands of dollars to elected officials, both at the city level and also certain amounts at the county level. And current, like as it stands, their current like out of the nine members of city council, including the mayor, they've given seven out of nine of them have received donations, some of which exceed, particularly Kevin McCarty, has exceeded over $40,000 with it, like since going into office. But one of the things they also are masters at manipulating when it comes to the budget time is the numbers that they choose to select and bring up, which last year's presentation around like what they do. They love to talk about how their staffing levels are incredibly low, is what they like to frame it as. Like they have a staffing crisis because they're when they're actually, budgeted for over 1,100 full-time positions, they only have for sworn deputies about 640 some odd positions, with the rest of them being non-sworn civilian positions. But what we've learned over the years, and that has slowly been getting more attention, is that a lot of those positions, those full-time positions that are budgeted for, are vacant. With last year being over 180 vacancies that the department has had, many of which have been vacant for more than a year, if and some even 2 years. And when departments have empty full-time positions, the funding that doesn't get used for to pay for people in those positions usually goes back to the budget to be for city council to reallocate as necessary. But for the police department in particular, they never give back any of the money that they end up saving from these vacancies because they use it to put into their overtime, which has been consistently over budget by tens of millions of dollars year after year, with little to no oversight. It's basically at the discretion of supervisors. And while that has been we've been able to slowly peel back at least some of the layers, a year after each one. The most recent numbers we have for overtime, for police overtime, being from fiscal year 24-25. We don't they are still, the city council still has not paid attention to that, and has not even put any of its oversight agencies like the city auditor to really take a deep look into that, even as we're facing a $66 million structural deficit that's only going to grow year after year.
Yeah, that is it. I think that most of our listeners would probably understand how wild this entire concept is of just saying we need to fill this position. So say we need $88,000 for this one start, position. I'm sure that a starting police officer makes more than that, and then they don't fill it. Right. And then they just well, I mean, that's our fun money, right? They just got to use it for where they want to put it into overtime. And it's been consistently, as Katie brought up in our last week's episode, it's been consistently particular officers who have received this overtime, right? And sometimes doubling or even tripling their salaries, which is wild. But I think another really important thing is kind of how they've been able to, because Chief Lester and a lot of, I will be, I want to be clear in that there are plenty of people in Sacramento who think that we should be spending even more money on the police, right? And it is often because of this kind of world that they have created in their narrative around their budget, right? That if they do not have this money at their disposal, right, then we're blood's going to be running in the streets, chaos will ensue. So just in terms of how, because I know that from the work that you've done had done on the Police Review Commission, that there was always this kind of battle between what the numbers show, right, in terms of crime and available officers, right, and then the story that they're telling to the city council and to the public, and kind of how those things don't match up. So just from like your experience, like how have those things kind of created like two very different understandings of what Sacramento looks like?
Yeah, I mean, you'll see a lot of folks, like you'll see a few, like quite a few folks that show up for these meetings who can afford to oftentimes show up for these meetings, talking about, how we need, we need like more money to the police department, people feeling unsafe. But like, and when we look at the numbers, the Sacramento Police Department budget has never been higher than it is. Like not even since before the 2008 Great Recession that we had, and it has only increased since 2018 by over I believe it's now 115 million dollars essentially at least that the police budget has gone up. But and yet, year after year, which based on the city's own community surveys, like the National Community Survey that they do year after year, the the sentiment, the public sentiment that people have of public safety and the work of the police department has consistently declined year after year, even though they have more money and more resources than they've had any year prior. And it also reflects in even the police department's own numbers, where we're seeing that when it comes to their clearance rate, which is the number of crimes they end up solving, through arrests, they their clearance rates have consistently been less than 15%, with 2024 being as low as 13%. And when it comes to property crime, it's even lower, where it's at 7% for all property crimes. And then the ones that we typically deal with, like larceny theft, is hovering at 6%, So it comes to the question of we're paying more money for police, for public safety than we ever have. In fact, as of last year's budget, public safety, both police and fire together, comprise more than 70% of our general fund dollars, which is our discretionary budget. And police take up about 40% of that pie. So what are we paying for when it comes to that? And that's what a lot of people don't seem to really understand. And that continues to just transfer over after each budget cycle is decided. We come back to the mid-year budget review and the early budget conversations we just started having, and almost forgetting about that and not really thinking about, okay, what is how are we actually measuring performance for these departments that we now that we are going to be having to cut? And what's on the table right now is largely going to be born on the back of a lot of departments that community members depend most upon for their quality of life beyond the police department.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that part is so important, because it's with such a structural deficit that the city is facing, there's going to be a lot of departments that are going to be dealing with cuts, and every one of them is going to be fighting for their survival and fighting for the amount of money that they need to receive to keep their programs going. But as you mentioned, not all of them are putting towards the funds of campaigns of politicians that are largely responsible for deciding their fate. So I just think that folks, really should be paying attention to these early budget conversations, because the budget review, the total budget review, isn't happening until May, right? So we got another month and a half before things start really falling into place. But these early conversations and these workshops around these items are so important to hear from the departments themselves, to kind of structure the narrative of why they need the money that they're asking for, why it's critical for them to receive the support, and for us as community members to really demand as much as we can transparency in this process, right? And the accountability of holding these people who work for us, right, who are receiving our tax dollars, as much as we can. So I really want to thank you for coming on and kind of breaking that down for us. Any other last thoughts, or how you think that people should be tied into this more effectively or efficiently that you would like to pass on to our listeners?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of unanswered questions that the current staff reports that have been put out around this like really need to be answering. And I'm hoping that, this new city manager with fresh eyes, from outside of the city's culture that, like that has maintained the status quo for like this disproportionate status quo for so many years is like really looking at because as it stands right now, what's current like there are four scenarios, right? That the city is considering when it comes to like how do we close this $66 million deficit, and the from the minimum being like just a few revenue tweaks and internal efficiencies that close part of it, all the way to like the highest tier where it's like they're talking about police closures, police unit disbandments, mass layoffs, and whatnot. And like the fact of the matter is like those those do not need to happen. The city staff gave the council a dial, not a switch, but like no setting
Right.
below full power actually balances like the books on it. And the police department, I think it's important going into this like for people to really look at who is bearing the biggest burden
Mhm.
of these cuts. Because it's right now, as like based on the staff reports that I'm seeing, the departments with the least amount of money are absorbing the most cuts. That's pools, that's after school programs
Right.
that don't have all of these well paid lobbyists like the police and fire unions do.
Yeah.
And like be prepared because the police department is going to come out and try to like be apoplectic, like talking like apocalyptic scenarios that if you make any cuts, even to our empty positions, you're going to lose the police department that you want. And like the city, like that's the thing is like it's a common like game with them where the police department like is offering up its most recently created community facing units but not the core command structure to like actually look at, and it's
Right.
not really a sincere prioritization. It's really just, hey, give away the things that are newest and people don't even know about, and and deflect away from anything that actually gives like is their biggest money maker,
Right.
which oftentimes lies in how much we depend upon them for homeless call responses or whatnot,
Right.
and just responding to 311 or non-law enforcement related matters.
Yeah. God, and it's like, don't threaten me with a good time.
Mhm. That part.
Well, thank you again so much. Folks want to get involved with this. It's a 2 o'clock meeting on Tuesdays. No, it's not always super convenient. But one thing that we haven't really pressed out in this on these shows is that you can always watch these meetings after the fact, right? They are recorded by the city, and just make sure that you're staying on top of what's being said in these conversations as much as possible. Thank you again, Keyan, so much for coming on. And until next week, guys, keep your eyes on those budgets.